Her hands shake as she opens the velvet box. 1 year ago, he told her she was just fun. Now he's proposing in front of their twins. The same man who destroyed her, once forever. Can she trust him again? Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe. The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor and Maya Chen walked through them like she was walking through fire. 3 years. 3 years since she'd last stood in this building. 3 years since she'd felt the weight of Italian marble under her feet. 3 years since she'd heard his voice say those words that still echoed in her skull at 2 in the morning when she couldn't sleep. You were just fun. Her hands tightened on the handles of the double stroller where Ethan and Emma sat, their hazel eyes, his eyes wide and curious as they took in the chrome and glass wonderland of Donovan Industries' executive floor. The receptionist looked up, her professionally pleasant expression flickering with confusion as she tried to place Maya's face. Maya watched the recognition dawn slowly, like watching someone solve a puzzle they didn't know they were doing. 3 years ago, Maya had been here nearly every evening, slipping past this same desk with a visitor's badge that might as well have been a scarlet letter, heading to the corner office where James Donovan kept his secrets and his expensive scotch, and apparently, her. Now she stood in a cream wrap dress that cost more than she used to make in a month, before she'd built her own consulting firm, from nothing but rage and a laptop, and the kind of determination that only comes from being utterly destroyed. Her natural curls were pulled back in a way that meant business, not the loose, touchable style James used to wind his fingers through while they lay in his office after hours. His shirt unbuttoned, her lipstick smeared across his collar, both of them pretending this was something more than what he'd eventually tell her it was. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, and Maya almost laughed because the woman had brought her coffee dozens of times, had smiled at her with that knowing smile that said everyone knew where Maya was going and why, had probably gossiped about her in the break room, wondering when the black girl from the marketing department would figure out she was playing a game she couldn't win. "I have an appointment with Mr. Donovan," Maya said, and her voice didn't shake, which felt like a victory even though her heart was trying to punch through her ribs. She'd practiced this moment in her bathroom mirror for 2 weeks, ever since his assistant had called to request a meeting, ever since Maya had realized that the universe was either incredibly cruel or had a vicious sense of humor. Emma started to fuss, reaching for the small stuffed elephant that had fallen to the floor, and Maya bent to retrieve it, using the moment to breathe, to remind herself why she was here, not for closure, not for revenge, for the twins, for the twins. Because James Donovan was their father, whether he wanted to be or not, whether he'd ever wanted to be or not, and they deserved to have their existence acknowledged by the man who'd created them in expensive hotel rooms and in his office, and once, memorably, in the supply closet on the 38th floor, when they'd both been too desperate to wait. The receptionist was speaking into her headset, her eyes darting between Maya and the children, and Maya could see the mental math happening, could see the woman counting backward, remembering when Maya had stopped coming around. "Your daughter is beautiful," a woman in the waiting area said, and Maya smiled tightly. "Daughters," she corrected. "Twins." The woman's eyes widened appreciatively, and Maya felt the familiar surge of fierce pride mixed with exhaustion because yes, they were beautiful, and yes, they were perfect, and yes, she'd done this alone for 3 years while their father had probably forgotten she existed. "Mr. Donovan will see you now," the receptionist said, her voice careful, professional, giving nothing away. Maya stood, gathering the diaper bag she'd packed with military precision, making sure she had everything she might need for this meeting that could last 5 minutes or change everything. She pushed the stroller toward the corner office, and with each step, she traveled backward in time, remembering the first time she'd made this walk, young and ambitious and so stupidly in love with a man who'd never promised her anything except the hours between 7 and 10 on weeknights. The door to his office was open, and she could see him before he saw her, standing by the window with his phone to his ear, his back to the door, his shoulders outlined by the sharp lines of his suit. He'd always worn his privilege like a second skin, comfortable and unquestioning, a white man from old money who'd never had to fight for anything except maybe his father's approval, which he'd earned by doubling the company's revenue in 5 years. Maya had admired that about him once, His competence, his brilliance, the way he could read a market report like some people read poetry. Now she just saw a man who'd never had to lose anything he actually cared about. She knocked on the doorframe, two sharp raps that made him turn, and Maya watched his face do something complicated, something she couldn't quite read, because she'd spent 3 years learning to stop reading him, stop analyzing every expression, stop hoping that maybe this time he'd look at her the way she needed him to look at her. His eyes dropped to the stroller, and the phone slipped slightly in his hand before he recovered, telling whoever was on the line that he'd call them back. "Maya," he said, and just her name, nothing else, like he'd used up all his words on that single syllable. He looked the same. Older maybe, a few more lines around his eyes, but still James, still devastating in the way that had made 28-year-old Maya forget every promise she'd ever made to herself about the kind of woman she wanted to be. His hair was still that sandy brown that looked gold in certain light, still perfectly cut in that way that whispered expensive without screaming it. His eyes were still that shade of green that she'd tried and failed to find in the paint samples when she'd decorated the twins' nursery, wanting to surround them with some piece of him, even if he'd never meet them, except now he would meet them. Now there was no avoiding it. "Hi, James," she said, and she pushed the stroller fully into his office, parking it between them like a shield, or maybe a weapon, she wasn't sure which. She watched him look at the children, really look at them, and she saw the exact moment he understood, saw his face go pale, saw his hand grip the edge of his desk, saw him do his own mental math, counting back, remembering the last time they'd been together. It had been his birthday. She'd surprised him with champagne and lingerie and hope, so much hope, thinking maybe after 2 years of this half-relationship, maybe on his birthday, maybe in the soft light of the candles she'd brought, maybe he'd finally say something that sounded like love. Instead, he'd said the thing about fun. Said it gently, kindly even, like he was doing her a favor by being clear. Said he cared about her, but this wasn't going anywhere, wasn't ever going to go anywhere, and she should probably start dating other people because he'd never be what she wanted him to be. She'd left his office that night with mascara running down her face, and she'd never come back, had quit her job the next week, had found out she was pregnant 2 weeks after that, had made a choice that she'd questioned 1,000 times but never regretted. She hadn't told him, hadn't called, hadn't emailed, hadn't shown up at his office with ultrasound photos and demands. She'd just disappeared, and he'd let her, which told her everything she needed to know about what she'd meant to him. "These are Ethan and Emma," Maya said, her voice steady, even though her hands were shaking. "They're 2.5. Their birthday is February 14th. She watched him do the math again, watched him realize that yes, Valentine's Day, how cosmically ironic, how perfectly on brand for their disaster of a relationship. They like dinosaurs and Moana and mac and cheese. Ethan can count to 20. Emma knows all her colors. They're smart and funny and perfect, and they're yours." James hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, was just staring at the children like they were a problem he couldn't solve with money or strategy or charm. Maya felt the anger rising in her throat, hot and familiar, the anger she'd worked so hard to process in therapy, the anger that had fueled her through 3 years of solo parenting and sleepless nights and moments when she'd been so tired she'd cried in the grocery store because she'd forgotten to buy milk again. "Say something," she said, and she hated that her voice broke, hated that after everything he could still make her feel small. "Why now?" he finally asked, and his voice was rougher than she remembered, strained in a way that might have been emotion if she still believed he was capable of it. "Why tell me now?" "Because I built something," Maya said, and she stood straighter, letting him see what she'd become without him. "I built a consulting firm. I have 12 employees. I just landed a contract with Meridian Tech, and they want to expand into Asia, and guess who they're partnering with for the US side?" She paused, letting it sink in. "Donovan Industries, your company. We're going to be working together for the next 18 months, and I refuse to spend that time pretending these children don't exist or that you didn't help create them." James finally moved, walking around his desk, but he didn't come closer to the stroller, didn't crouch down to meet his children, just leaned against the desk and looked at Maya like she was a stranger he was trying to place. "You should have told me," he said, and the accusation in his voice lit something bright and furious in her chest. "Told you what exactly?" she said, taking a step forward. "Told you that the fun you were having had consequences. Told you that I was pregnant with your children after you made it crystal clear that I meant nothing to you. Should I have showed up here, belly swollen, begging you to care?" She laughed, sharp and bitter. "I have more self-respect than that, James." "That's not fair," he started, and she held up a hand to stop him. "You told me I was just fun," she said, and each word felt like pulling shrapnel from a wound. "You told me not to catch feelings. You told me you'd never want a relationship, never want a family, never want anything serious. So I left, and I handled it, and I gave these babies everything they needed without you. But now our professional lives are colliding, and they deserve to know their father, even if their father didn't want them." "I never said I didn't want children," James said quietly, and Maya laughed again, because of course he was going to pass words now, going to lawyer his way through this conversation like it was a contract negotiation. "You said I was just fun," Maya repeated, and she heard her voice rising, heard 3 years of hurt and anger and exhaustion bleeding through her carefully constructed composure. "You said it dismissively, like I was a hobby you'd grown bored of. What was I supposed to think? That you secretly wanted a family, but just not with me?" The silence between them felt like a living thing, pulsing with everything they weren't saying, and Maya realized with sudden clarity that she'd been hoping for something from this meeting, some reaction that would make the last 3 years make sense. An apology maybe, regret, something that would tell her she'd mattered, even just a little. Ethan started to cry, that building whimper that meant he was getting hungry, and Maya automatically reached into the diaper bag for the snacks she'd packed. James watched her, and something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like pain. "Can I?" he started, then stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "Can I hold them?" Maya froze, a package of goldfish crackers in her hand, and stared at him. This was what she'd come here for, wasn't it? For him to acknowledge them, to be part of their lives. So why did the idea of him touching them make her want to snatch the stroller and run? "Because they're mine," a voice in her head whispered. "Because I built them from nothing, grew them in my body, fed them from my breasts, walked the floors with them at 3 in the morning when they had colic. Because he gets to just walk in now and be their father without earning it, without suffering for it, without bleeding for it. But she'd come here for them, not for her." So she nodded and unbuckled Ethan, who'd stopped crying and was now looking at James with open curiosity. Kids were like that, Maya had learned. No prejudice, no history, just pure presence. She lifted Ethan out and held him for a moment, breathing in his baby shampoo smell, feeling his warm weight against her chest, and then she stepped forward and placed him in James's arms. James held him awkwardly, like he was an expensive vase that might break, and Ethan immediately reached for his tie, grabbing it with sticky fingers. Maya saw James's instinct to pull away, then saw him stop himself, let the kid grab the probably $1,000 tie, and something in her chest twisted. "Hi, buddy," James said softly, and Ethan giggled, delighted by this new person, this man who had his eyes and his dimples and half his DNA, and none of the history that made Maya want to scream. Emma was watching from the stroller, her thumb in her mouth, her elephant clutched tight. She was the more cautious twin, the one who held back, who studied situations before diving in, like Maya. Ethan was all impulse and joy and fearless leaping. Like James, probably, though Maya had never known him well enough to say for sure. That was the thing that hurt most, maybe. She'd shared his bed, his body, 2 years of evenings and secrets and pleasure, and she'd never actually known him. "They look like you," Maya said, and she hadn't meant to say it, but the words came anyway. "Everyone sees it immediately. Your eyes, your smile. Emma has your nose. Sometimes when Ethan laughs, I hear you." James looked up from Ethan, and his eyes were bright with something Maya couldn't name. "I have a son," he said, like he was testing the words, seeing how they felt in his mouth. "I have children, 2 children." And suddenly his face crumpled, not crying but something close, something raw that Maya had never seen from him. "Why didn't you tell me, Maya? Why didn't you give me a chance?" "Because you broke my heart," she wanted to say. "Because I couldn't survive you rejecting them the way you rejected me. Because I was terrified you'd want them sometimes, but not all the time, that they'd grow up feeling like I felt, not quite enough, not quite right, always wondering why they weren't worth more. Because you told me what I meant to you," she said instead. "And it wasn't enough to build a life on. James looked at Ethan, then at Emma, then back at Maya, and she saw him doing calculations, seeing futures, weighing options. This was what he did, she remembered. This was his gift, seeing 10 moves ahead, anticipating problems, finding solutions. She wondered what solution he saw for this, for the mess they'd made, for the lives that depended on them figuring it out. "I need time," he said finally, and Maya felt something in her deflate, even though she'd expected exactly this. Time to think, time to process, time to figure out how to fit us into your life without disrupting it too much, right? "That's not what I meant," he said, and there was an edge to his voice now, frustration bleeding through. "You show up here after 3 years with 2 children I didn't know existed, and you want me to just immediately know what to do, how to feel. This is a lot, Maya." "It was a lot for me too," she shot back. "Imagine finding out you're pregnant and alone, and the father told you that you were just fun. Imagine every doctor's appointment solo, every ultrasound solo, every moment of terror that something would go wrong and you'd be dealing with it solo. Imagine labor, James. Imagine pushing 2 human beings out of your body with no one holding your hand because the man who helped create them made it clear you weren't worth more than a few hours of his time each week." She was crying now, angry tears that she tried to wipe away before they could fall, but they came too fast. Emma started to cry too, picking up on Maya's distress, and Maya went to the stroller, unbuckling her daughter, holding her close. "You don't get to make me the villain here," Maya said, her voice muffled against Emma's curls. "You don't get to be hurt that I didn't tell you when you made it impossible for me to tell you. When you made it clear that anything real, anything permanent, anything that required you to actually show up was off the table." James was still holding Ethan, who'd gone quiet, his little hand still wrapped around James's tie. "I never said that," James said quietly. "I never said I didn't want something real. I said we were having fun. I said I wasn't ready for serious. I never said never." Maya stared at him, and the anger shifted into something else, something that felt like grief. "That's the same thing, James," she said. "When you tell someone you're not ready for serious, when you say it after 2 years of being together, what you're really saying is you're not serious about them. You're saying maybe someday with someone else, but not now, and not with you." She paused, adjusting Emma's weight on her hip. "I heard what you were really saying, even if you didn't." The office felt too small suddenly, too full of the past and the present, and 2 possible futures colliding. Maya could see both versions playing out, one where James stepped up, became present, co-parented with her in some functional arrangement that let the twins know their father, and another where he paid child support and maybe showed up for birthdays, but never quite integrated them into his real life, his real family, whatever that looked like for him now. "I'm not asking you to marry me," Maya said, and she was surprised by how much it hurt to say it, to acknowledge that even now, even after everything, some stupid part of her had held on to the fantasy. "I'm not asking you to love me or even like me. I'm asking you to know your children, to be in their lives in whatever way you can manage, to not make them feel like they're a burden or a mistake or something you have to schedule around your real life." James finally looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw him seeing her differently, not as the girl who'd been convenient, who'd fit into his schedule, who'd asked for so little that he'd been able to give it without thinking. He was seeing her as she was now, successful, powerful, a mother who'd built a life from scratch while he'd coasted on his family name and certainty. "I have a board meeting in an hour," he said, and Maya's heart sank, because of course this was how it would go. But then he continued, "But I'm cancelling it. Can you stay? Can we talk about this properly?" Maya hesitated because she'd prepared for rejection, had armored herself against it, had expected him to hand Ethan back and usher her out with promises to have his lawyer call. She hadn't prepared for him to actually show up. "I have a nanny waiting in the parking garage," she admitted, "in case this went badly." "Smart," James said, and there was something that might have been admiration in his voice. "You always were smart, Maya. Smarter than me in a lot of ways. I just didn't see it." She didn't know what to do with that, so she nodded. "I can stay for a bit," she said. "But Ethan needs lunch soon, and Emma gets cranky if she doesn't nap by 1. "Okay," James said, and he looked down at the child in his arms like he was just now realizing what he was holding. "Okay, let me just make a call, and then we'll figure this out." He walked to his desk, still holding Ethan, and picked up his phone with his free hand, and Maya watched him cancel his meeting, watched him tell his assistant to hold all calls, watched him choose these children he'd just met over the company that had always been his first priority. It didn't fix anything. It didn't erase 3 years of absence, or the words that had shattered her, or the fact that he'd let her disappear without ever wondering where she'd gone. But it was something. It was a start. And as Maya sat down in one of his expensive leather chairs with Emma in her lap, watching James awkwardly try to entertain a toddler while also being James Donovan, CEO, an emotional disaster, she thought maybe, just maybe, they could figure out how to do this without destroying each other in the process. Emma reached for her brother, making grabby hands and whining, and Maya stood to take Ethan so the twins could be together. As she reached for him, her hand brushed James's, and the touch sent a shock through her system. Muscle memory of all the times they'd touched before, all the ways they'd learned each other's bodies. James felt it too. She saw it in the way his breath caught, in the way his eyes darkened for just a second before he looked away. "This is going to be complicated," Maya said, and it wasn't a question. "Everything worth doing is complicated," James answered, and he was looking at her like he used to look at her 3 years ago, before the birthday, before the words that ended them, and Maya felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Hope, maybe, or just the memory of hope. She couldn't tell the difference anymore. The twins were babbling to each other now in their own private language, and James was watching them with an expression Maya couldn't read, something between wonder and terror and grief for the time he'd already lost. She wanted to comfort him, wanted to tell him it would be okay, that they'd figure it out, but that wasn't her job anymore, if it ever had been. "Tell me about them," James said, sitting back down behind his desk, but keeping his eyes on the children. "Tell me everything." So Maya did. She told him about the pregnancy, the complications, the premature labor at 36 weeks that had terrified her. She told him about the first time Ethan smiled, the first time Emma rolled over, the first words and first steps, and all the firsts he'd missed. She told him about the nights she'd sobbed in the shower because she was so exhausted and so alone and so angry at him for not being there, for not even knowing. She told him about starting her business while they were still infants, working from home with one baby on her lap and another in a swing, taking calls during naps and making presentations while they slept. And James listened, really listened, not interrupting, not defending himself, just taking it all in. And when she finally stopped talking, her voice hoarse, her eyes dry because she'd cried out all her tears years ago, he said 2 words, "I'm sorry," just that, 2 words. Not enough to fix anything, not enough to make up for what he'd missed or what she'd endured alone, but something, an acknowledgement, an opening. "I know," Maya said, because she did know, could see it in the way he was holding himself, could feel it in the air between them. "But sorry doesn't change anything, James. Sorry doesn't give you back the 2.5 years you missed. Sorry doesn't make this less complicated." "I know," he echoed, and they sat there in the complicated silence, 2 people who'd once meant something to each other, who'd created 2 whole humans together, who now had to figure out how to exist in each other's lives without the foundation of love or trust or even basic friendship to build on. The twins were getting restless, Emma rubbing her eyes, Ethan starting to whine, and Maya stood, gathering her things. "I should go," she said, "before they melt down completely." "When can I see them again?" James asked, and the question sounded hungry, desperate even, and Maya had to remind herself that just because he wanted them now didn't mean he wouldn't disappoint them later, wouldn't put them second, wouldn't make them feel the way he'd made her feel. "I don't know," she said honestly. "We need to figure this out slowly, James. For their sake. They don't know you. You're a stranger to them. We can't just throw you into their lives and expect them to understand." "But I'm their father," James said, and there was frustration in his voice, like he wanted to claim his rights without doing the work, and Maya felt her defenses rise. "Biologically, yes," she said. "But being a father is more than DNA, James. It's showing up. It's consistency. It's putting them first even when it's inconvenient." She paused, letting that sink in. "Can you do that? Can you put them first?" James didn't answer right away, and Maya appreciated that at least, appreciated that he was actually thinking about it, instead of making promises he might not keep. "I want to try," he finally said. I want to be in their lives, Maya. I want to be their father, not just the guy who pays child support." Maya studied him, trying to see past her own hurt and anger to the man underneath, trying to figure out if he meant it or if this was just the shock talking, the novelty of discovering he had children. In a week, would he still feel this way? In a month? In a year, when they were being difficult, when they were sick or cranky or demanding in the way children were? "Okay," she said slowly. "We'll start small. Maybe you come by my place this weekend, spend some time with them in a familiar environment, see how they respond to you, and then we'll figure out next steps based on how that goes." "Where do you live?" James asked, and Maya gave him her address, watched him type it into his phone, and realized he was going to know where she lived now, was going to be part of her life in a way she'd never imagined when she'd walked in here this morning. "Saturday," she said, 2 p.m. "Don't be late. They nap in the morning, and they're disaster humans if they don't get their sleep." "I'll be there," James promised, and Maya wanted to believe him, but belief required trust, and she'd used all her trust up 3 years ago. She pushed the stroller toward the door, and James stood, like he wanted to walk her out, or say something else, or maybe just keep her there a little longer. But Maya kept moving, because staying was dangerous, because the way he was looking at her made her remember things she needed to forget, made her wonder if maybe she'd misunderstood something 3 years ago, if maybe there'd been more to their story than she'd thought. But no, she couldn't let herself go there. Couldn't let herself imagine that the "you were just fun" had meant something other than what it sounded like. Couldn't let herself hope that maybe he'd wanted her all along, but been too scared or too stupid or too something to say so. That way lay madness and heartbreak and all the mistakes she'd already made once. "Maya," James called as she reached the door, and she stopped but didn't turn around. "Thank you for telling me, for giving me a chance." "Don't thank me yet," Maya said, and now she did look back, making sure he saw her face, saw how serious she was. "This isn't about us, James. This is about them. If you hurt them, if you disappoint them, if you make them feel like they're not enough, I will destroy you. I don't care about your money or your power or your company. I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are." She saw him swallow, saw him nod, saw him understand that she meant every word, and then she turned and walked out, past the receptionist who definitely heard some of that conversation, past the waiting area where people tried not to stare at her, past the security desk, and into the elevator, and down 42 floors to the parking garage where her nanny was waiting with a worried expression. "How did it go?" the nanny asked. And Maya laughed, because how could she possibly explain what just happened, how her past and present had collided, how the man who'd broken her heart had just met the children who'd saved it. "I don't know yet," Maya said, honestly, buckling the twins into their car seats. "Ask me again in a year." She drove home through midday traffic, listening to the twins babble in the back seat, thinking about James's face when he'd held Ethan, about the way he'd cancelled his meeting, about the question he'd asked, "When can I see them again?" like they were something precious he'd been searching for. But she also remembered the other James, the one who'd told her not to catch feelings, who'd kept her separate from the rest of his life, who'd never once asked her to stay over, or meet his friends, or be anything more than his convenient evening entertainment. She remembered how small he'd made her feel, how disposable, how utterly convinced she'd been that she'd meant nothing. And now he had to mean something to their children, had to figure out how to be present and consistent. Maya didn't know if he was capable of it, didn't know if he'd show up on Saturday. She pulled into her driveway, a modest house in a good neighborhood that she'd bought with her own money, and felt a surge of pride. She'd done this. She'd survived and thrived. The twins were happy and healthy and loved. She'd been enough, but they deserved to know their father, so she'd give James a chance. One chance, and if he blew it, she'd know she tried. That night, after the twins were asleep, Maya sat on her back porch with a glass of wine, thinking about the look on James's face when he'd realized the children were his. She hadn't expected the grief, the raw emotion of a man realizing he'd missed something irreplaceable. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, though she knew it was him before she opened it now. Her heart raced so wildly. The message was simple. "I can't stop thinking about them. About their eyes, their laugh, the fact that they exist and I didn't know. About everything I missed. I know I have no right to ask this, but could you send me a picture? just so I can see them again." Maya stared at her phone, thumb hovering over the keyboard. This was how it started. The texts, the small requests, the gradual weaving of his life into theirs. It could go so many ways from here. He could become the father they deserved, or he could break their hearts the way he'd broken hers. She scrolled through her camera roll, finding a photo from earlier that day, before the meeting. The twins playing in her office, both covered in stickers, laughing about something only they understood. She sent it without comment, without softening words, and watched the typing bubble appear and disappear and appear again. "They're perfect, Maya. Thank you for keeping them safe, for doing this alone when you shouldn't have had to. I know I can't get that time back, but I swear I'm going to make up for it. I'm going to be the father they deserve." Maya set her phone down without responding. Words were easy, showing up was hard. She'd learned that lesson the most painful way possible. Friday passed in a blur of work calls and client meetings. Her business partner kept giving her concerned looks, probably noticing how distracted she was. The Meridian contract loomed large. 18 months of working alongside James Donovan, pretending to be professional while co-parenting children he'd just discovered existed. The universe had a sick sense of humor. Saturday morning arrived with that same mocking sunshine. Maya dressed the twins in matching navy outfits with little whales, using her adorable children as weapons, because yes, she absolutely was. At 1:55 she checked her phone obsessively. At 1:58 she paced. At 1:59 she told herself she'd been stupid to hope. And then at 2 p.m. exactly, her doorbell rang. James stood on her porch, holding a bag from an expensive toy store, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. He wore jeans and a casual button-down, like he'd tried to dress down but couldn't quite escape looking like money. His hair was slightly messy, like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked terrified. "Hi," he said, and Maya stepped back to let him into her home and her life and her children's hearts, praying she wasn't making a mistake that would haunt them forever. The twins were in the living room, Emma playing with blocks, Ethan watching cartoons. Both looked up when James walked in. Emma immediately hid behind the couch, still cautious, still measuring, but Ethan scrambled up and toddled toward James with his arms raised, already trusting in that way only children could trust. James dropped his bag and scooped Ethan up like it was the most natural thing in the world, and Ethan giggled and grabbed James's face with both hands and said "Dada" with perfect confidence, even though Maya had never taught him that word. Maya felt tears prick her eyes because her baby had just called James Dad, without knowing why, without understanding what it meant, just sensing somehow that this man was important, was his. And James looked at Maya over Ethan's head with an expression of pure devastation and joy, tangled together. He said "Dada." James whispered, like he couldn't believe it. "He's been saying it lately," Maya admitted. "I think he picked it up at daycare. I didn't want to tell you yet, because I didn't want you to feel pressured." James just shook his head, holding Ethan tighter, and Maya saw him struggling not to cry, fighting for control. Emma was watching from behind the couch, her elephant clutched tight. James crouched down, still holding Ethan, making himself smaller and less threatening. "Hi, Emma," he said softly. "I brought you something. Would you like to see?" Emma didn't move, just stared at him with those hazel eyes that were his eyes. He reached into his bag slowly, carefully, and pulled out a stuffed giraffe that was the twin of Emma's elephant. Same brand, same style. "I thought your elephant might like a friend," James said, setting the giraffe on the floor between them. "Maybe they could play together." Emma looked at Maya for permission, and Maya nodded, and Emma crept out from behind the couch, picked up the giraffe, and immediately started making the two stuffed animals kiss each other, lost in her own world. James watched her with that same expression of wonder, mixed with pain, mourning even as he celebrated. They played for hours. James got down on the floor with them, let them climb on him, read them books with different voices for each character, pushed them on their toy cars, watched Moana, even though Maya could see he was dying of boredom, because that's what parents did. They showed up for the mundane moments, not just the milestones. When the twins were finally exhausted, lying on the couch in a tangle of limbs and stuffed animals, James turned to Maya. "Can we talk? Outside, maybe?" Maya nodded, checking that the twins were really asleep, then followed James out to her back porch. The same porch where she'd sat 2 nights ago reading his first text, wondering what would happen. "They're incredible," James said, leaning against the railing, looking back through the window at the sleeping children. "I can't believe I helped make them. I can't believe they're real." "They've always been real, James," Maya said quietly. "You just didn't know about them." He turned to look at her, his expression serious, intent. "I need you to understand something, Maya. What I said 3 years ago, the thing about fun, I didn't mean what you thought I meant." Maya felt her stomach drop, because no, they weren't doing this, weren't rehashing this. "It doesn't matter," she started. But James interrupted. "It matters to me," he said. "It matters because I need you to know that I was an idiot and a coward, and I let the best thing in my life walk away because I was too scared to admit I wanted more." Maya stared at him, her heart pounding. "You told me I was just fun," she repeated. "You said it dismissively, like I was a hobby you'd grown bored of." "I know," James said, running his hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. "I know what it sounded like, but Maya, I was falling for you, and it terrified me. My father had just died, the company was imploding, I was supposed to take over this legacy I didn't know if I could handle, and there you were, this brilliant, beautiful woman who made me feel things I'd never felt before, and I panicked. I pushed you away before you could leave first." Maya shook her head. "If you cared about me, you would have said so. If you wanted me to stay, you would have asked me to stay. You let me walk out of your office that night, James. You let me quit my job, leave the company, disappear from your life, and you never once tried to find me." James flinched like she'd hit him. "I thought you were better off without me. I thought you deserved someone who wasn't a mess, who could give you what you needed. And by the time I realized how stupid that was, you were gone, and I didn't know how to find you without looking like a stalker or making things worse. You could have tried," Maya said, and now she was crying. Damn it, tears streaming down her face. "You could have called or emailed or shown up at my door. You could have done something other than nothing." He stepped toward her, reaching out like he wanted to touch her, then stopped himself. "You're right. You're absolutely right. I should have tried. I should have fought for you, should have told you the truth instead of hiding behind stupid pride and fear. I failed you, Maya. I know that. And I know I can't fix it or take it back, but I need you to know that I cared. I cared so much it scared me, and I handled it in the worst possible way." Maya wiped her face, trying to pull herself together. "It doesn't change anything. It doesn't change the fact that you hurt me, or that I raised our children alone, or that you missed 2.5 years of their lives. It's just context. It's just explanation. It doesn't make it better." "I know," he said, and the resignation in his voice made her look up at him. "I know it doesn't fix anything. I just needed you to know that you weren't just fun to me, Maya. You were never just fun. You were everything, and I was too much of a coward to say so until it was too late." They stood there in the fading afternoon light, two people who'd created life together, but never managed to build a life together, and Maya felt the weight of all the what-ifs crushing her chest. "What do we do now?" Maya finally asked. James looked at her, really looked at her. "We figure it out. One day at a time, one moment at a time. We put them first, and we try not to screw them up too badly with our baggage." Maya laughed despite herself, a wet, broken sound. "That's a low bar. It's a realistic bar," James countered. "We're disaster humans, Maya, but maybe together we can be slightly less disastrous." Inside, Ethan started crying, waking from his nap, and Maya automatically turned toward the door, but James caught her arm gently. "Let me," he said. "Please, let me get him." And Maya watched through the window as James went inside and picked up their son, held him close, walked him around the room, bouncing slightly, murmuring comfort, and Ethan settled against his shoulder like he'd been doing this forever, like James had been there since the beginning. Over the next few weeks, James showed up, not just physically but emotionally. He came to Maya's house 3 times a week, spending hours with the twins. He learned their routines, their preferences, their moods. He figured out that Emma liked to be read to quietly, while Ethan needed to burn energy. He discovered that they both loved bath time, but hated getting their hair washed. He was there for the mundane moments, the boring parts, the difficult parts. Maya watched him fall in love with his children, watched him become a father in real time, and something in her chest started to unknot. He wasn't perfect. He showed up late once because of a meeting that ran long, and Maya had been prepared to eviscerate him, but he'd been genuinely apologetic, had rescheduled the meeting for the next time, had learned. The Meridian contract kicked off, forcing Maya and James to work together professionally. It was awkward at first, navigating boardrooms and client meetings while knowing they'd be doing bath time together later. But they found a rhythm. James respected her expertise, deferred to her on marketing strategy, made sure everyone knew she was the lead consultant. It was different from how he'd treated her 3 years ago, when she'd been junior staff and he'd been the boss who slept with her in secret. One evening, 6 weeks after that first meeting in his office, James stayed for dinner. Maya had made spaghetti, and the twins were covered in sauce, and Emma had decided that James's hair needed meatballs in it, and Ethan was singing a song he'd made up about dinosaurs, and it was chaos and mess, and absolutely perfect. After the twins were in bed, James helped Maya clean up the kitchen, and they moved around each other with an ease that felt both new and familiar. Maya was washing dishes when James said, quietly, "I'm falling in love with them, with being their father. I didn't know I could feel like this." Maya set down the dish she was holding, her hands sudsy, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. "They love you too. I can see it. The way Ethan lights up when you walk in. The way Emma brings you her elephant to fix, even though she won't let anyone else touch it." James was quiet for a moment, drying a plate with careful attention. "Can I ask you something?" Maya braced herself. "Sure. Do you think we could ever?" He paused, searching for words. "Do you think there's any chance that we could be more than just co-parents? That we could be a family? A real family?" Maya turned to look at him, and her heart was racing because she'd been asking herself the same question for weeks, watching him with the twins, seeing glimpses of the man she'd fallen in love with 3 years ago, mixed with this new version who was trying so hard to show up, to be present, to be enough. "James," she said slowly, "I don't know if I can trust you with my heart again. You broke me once. I survived it, but barely. I built a life from those broken pieces, and I'm terrified of letting you close enough to shatter me again." "I know," he said, and he set down the dish towel and turned to face her fully. "I know I don't deserve your trust. I know I have to earn it. But Maya, I'm not that scared kid anymore. I'm not running from my feelings or pushing away the people I care about. These last 6 weeks with you and the twins, they've been the best weeks of my life. Coming here, being with you all, it's the only time I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Maya felt tears building again. "What if it doesn't work? What if we try and fail and the twins get hurt in the crossfire? What if we don't try," James countered, "and we spend the rest of our lives wondering what if? What if we could have been happy? What if we could have given them the family they deserve?" He stepped closer, close enough that Maya could feel the heat of him, could remember all the ways they'd touched before. "I'm not asking you to trust me completely right now," he said softly. "I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove I've changed, to show you that I can be the man you need, the father our children need, to demonstrate that you weren't wrong about me 3 years ago. You saw something in me that I was too scared to see in myself." Maya looked up at him, at those green eyes that their children had inherited, at the face she'd once dreamed of waking up next to, and she felt herself teetering on the edge of something terrifying and exhilarating. "If I say yes," she said, "if I let you in, really in, you have to promise me something." "Anything," James said. "You have to promise that if you're going to leave, if you're going to decide this isn't what you want, you tell me immediately. You don't string me along. You don't let me fall in love with the possibility of us only to rip it away. You be honest, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." "I promise," James said, and he reached up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Maya, I'm not going anywhere. I'm all in. With the twins, with you, with this messy, complicated, beautiful thing we're building. I'm done running." And then he kissed her, soft and sweet, and nothing like the desperate, hungry kisses they'd shared 3 years ago. This was different. This was a promise. This was a beginning. Over the next few months, they built something real. James moved slower than he had before, courting Maya properly, taking her on actual dates when her nanny could watch the twins. They talked about everything they'd never talked about before. His childhood, her fears, their dreams, their scars. He met her friends, introduced her to his family as the mother of his children and the woman he loved, not some secret he kept hidden. The twins thrived with both parents present. Ethan started calling James Daddy without prompting, with full understanding of what it meant. Emma slowly opened up, showing James her cautious, thoughtful heart. They celebrated their 3rd birthday together, all 4 of them, and Maya took photos of James with cake on his face, and both twins climbing on him like he was a jungle gym, and she thought about how different this birthday was from the last one, when she'd been alone with them, missing a father they'd never met. The Meridian contract was a massive success. Maya's firm got recognition in industry publications, and James made sure everyone knew she was the genius behind the strategy. He showed up to her office Christmas party, proud and supportive, introducing himself as her partner in every sense of the word. 1 year after that first meeting in his office, James took Maya and the twins to the park. It was a perfect fall day, leaves crunching underfoot, the twins running ahead to the playground. James caught Maya's hand, lacing their fingers together, and led her to a bench where they could watch the children play. "I have something to tell you," he said, and Maya's heart jumped because that phrase could mean anything. James pulled out his phone and showed her an email. It was from his lawyer. Paternity test results, officially documented. Legal paperwork establishing him as the father. Setting up college funds, ensuring the twins would be taken care of if anything happened to him. "I should have done this a year ago," James said. "But I wanted to make sure you knew it wasn't about obligation or legal responsibility. It's about love. I love them, Maya. I love being their father, and I want it official in every way possible." Maya looked at the paperwork, at the numbers in the college funds that would ensure the twins could go anywhere, do anything, and she felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," James said firmly. "They're my children. They deserve everything I can give them, and so do you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, and Maya's breath caught because she knew what was in that box, had dreamed of this moment 3 years ago, before everything fell apart. "Maya Chen," James said, and his voice was shaking slightly. "You are the strongest, most brilliant, most infuriating woman I've ever met. You built a life from nothing, raised 2 perfect humans alone, succeeded beyond measure, all while I was too stupid to see what I'd lost. You didn't need me, but you let me in anyway. You gave me a chance I didn't deserve, and you made me want to be better. You made me be better. I love you. I'm in love with you. I have been since the first time I saw you laugh at something stupid I said in a marketing meeting. I was just too scared to admit it, but I'm not scared anymore. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worth the risk?" Maya looked at him, at this man who'd broken her heart, and then spent a year putting it back together piece by piece, who'd shown up for their children every single day, who'd fought his own fears and inadequacies to become someone worthy of their love. She thought about the girl she'd been 3 years ago, desperate for him to love her back, willing to accept crumbs. She thought about the woman she'd become, strong and whole and complete on her own. And she realized she wasn't saying yes because she needed him, but because she wanted him. Because they'd built something worth keeping. "Yes," she said, and James's face broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll let you prove it every day for the rest of our lives." He slipped the ring on her finger, and it was perfect, understated but elegant, exactly her style. He kissed her like he had a year ago in her kitchen, like a promise, like a beginning, and the twins saw them from the playground and came running, demanding to know what was happening. "Daddy asked Mommy to marry him," Maya said, and even saying the words felt surreal, and Mommy said yes. Ethan cheered without fully understanding, just happy that his parents were happy. Emma studied them seriously, then nodded her approval. "Good," she said, in that solemn way she had. "We're a family now." "We always were, sweetheart," James said, picking her up. "We just needed time to figure it out." They got married 6 months later in a small ceremony in Maya's backyard, the twins as flower girl and ring bearer, making adorable chaos of the whole event. James cried during his vows, promising to love Maya and their children fiercely, to show up even when it was hard, to never take for granted the gift she'd given him by letting him back into her life. Maya promised to trust him with her heart, to build a life together that honored both their past pain and their present joy. 2 years after the wedding, Maya was pregnant again, planned this time, wanted by both of them. A little girl they named Grace, because that's what they'd given each other. Grace to fail, grace to try again, grace to become who they needed to be. Ethan and Emma were obsessed with their baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her, singing to her, bringing her toys she was too young for. James was a natural with her, confident in ways he hadn't been with the twins, secure in his role as father and husband. On Grace's first birthday, Maya stood in their backyard watching James play with all three kids, and she thought about that day 4 years ago when she'd walked into his office with the twins, terrified and angry and so desperately hoping he'd step up. She thought about all the ways it could have gone wrong, all the moments they could have failed each other. Her phone buzzed with a text from James, even though he was 30 feet away. She looked down. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for those words 3 years ago that made me fight for what we could be. Thank you for these 3 perfect humans. Thank you for choosing me. I love you." Maya looked up to find him watching her, and she smiled, typing back quickly. "Thank you for showing up, for keeping your promises, for loving us the way we deserve to be loved. I love you too." And as she watched her husband chase their 3 children around the yard, as she felt the warmth of the setting sun and heard their laughter echo off the house she'd bought when she'd been alone and scared, Maya Chen thought about the phrase that had once destroyed her. "You were just fun." She'd thought it meant she was disposable, temporary, not worth keeping. But maybe what it had really meant was that James hadn't been ready, that he'd needed to lose everything to learn what mattered, that some people had to break before they could become whole. They'd both been just fun once, casual, unserious, afraid to want more, but they'd become so much more than that. They'd become a family, messy and complicated and absolutely real. They'd become partners who chose each other every day, who worked through the hard stuff, who built something lasting from the wreckage of what they'd been. And that, Maya thought, watching James lift Ethan onto his shoulders while Emma demanded equal treatment and Grace squealed with delight in her arms, that was worth the risk. That was worth the pain. That was worth everything. But life wasn't a fairy tale that ended at happily ever after. It was messy and complicated and full of moments that tested them. Like when the twins started kindergarten and Ethan struggled with separation anxiety, clinging to Maya's leg and crying that he needed both mommy and daddy. James left a board meeting mid-presentation to come sit with Ethan in the classroom until he felt safe enough to let go. The board was furious. James didn't care. Or when Emma came home one day asking why her skin was darker than daddy's, why some kids at school said they didn't look like a real family. James sat her down and talked to her about how love makes families real, not matching skin tones, about how beautiful she was, about how her brown skin came from mommy and was something to be proud of. He bought books about mixed-race families, made sure the twins saw families like theirs represented everywhere. He did the work, not because it was easy, but because his children needed him to. Maya's business continued to grow, sometimes requiring travel. The first time she had to leave for a week-long conference in Singapore, she was terrified, not of leaving the children with James, but of what it meant that she trusted him completely with them, that her whole life, her whole heart was in his hands. He sent her videos every night, bath time chaos, bedtime stories, Emma explaining her very serious thoughts about why dinosaurs were better than princesses, even though she liked both, Ethan showing off the tower he'd built that was taller than him, Grace taking her first steps while Maya was 7,000 miles away. And yes, she cried about missing it, but James had captured it on video and sent it immediately with a message that said, "She waited for you to get home to do it again, so you could see it in person." And Grace did wait. The moment Maya walked through the door, James set their daughter down, and Grace toddled toward Maya with her arms out, and Maya scooped her up and cried, and thought about how different this was from those early years when she'd handled everything alone. There were harder moments too, like when James's mother made a comment at Christmas dinner about how surprising it was that James had children with someone who wasn't from their circle, someone from marketing of all things. Maya had felt herself shrinking, becoming that girl who wasn't quite enough again, but James had stood up immediately. "Mom," he'd said, his voice ice-cold in a way Maya had never heard. "Maya is my wife, the mother of my children, and the smartest person I know. She built a multi-million-dollar consulting firm from nothing while raising twins alone. She's more successful than half the trust fund babies in your social circle, and if you can't respect her, you won't be part of our lives. The choice is yours." His mother had apologized, stiffly at first, then more genuinely, when she'd seen how serious James was. Maya had watched her husband defend her, claim her publicly, in front of the people whose approval he'd once valued above everything, and felt something settle in her chest. He meant it. The promises, the vows, the everyday choice to show up. He meant all of it. They went to therapy together, both couples counseling and co-parenting sessions, working through the hurt from 3 years ago, learning how to communicate, figuring out how to be partners in every sense. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes Maya's old wounds opened up, and she lashed out, accused him of not really meaning it, of planning to leave eventually. Sometimes James retreated into work when things got emotional, falling back on old patterns. But they always came back to each other, always talked it through, always chose to stay. The twins grew into themselves. Ethan was all energy and enthusiasm, making friends easily, constantly in motion. He had James's easy charm and Maya's determination. Emma was thoughtful and artistic, creating elaborate stories with her toys, drawing pictures of their family in careful detail. She had Maya's careful observation and James's strategic thinking. Grace was still too young to know, but she already showed signs of being a perfect blend of both of them, stubborn and sweet in equal measure. On their 5th wedding anniversary, James surprised Maya with a weekend away, just the two of them. His mother, who'd since become a devoted grandmother, working to earn back trust, watched the kids. Maya and James went to a bed and breakfast in wine country, and it felt like a different universe from their early relationship. No hiding, no secrecy, no shame, just two people who'd found their way to each other through all the mess and pain. On the last night, lying in bed wrapped around each other, James said something that had been on his mind. "Do you ever wish I'd said it differently? That night, 3 years before the twins, when I said you were just fun." Maya was quiet for a moment, thinking about it. "Sometimes," she admitted, "sometimes I wish you'd been brave enough to tell me the truth, that you were falling for me but scared, that you wanted more but didn't know how to ask for it." She paused. "But then I think about who we both were then. I was looking for you to complete me, to make me worthy, and you were running from anything real because you didn't think you deserved it. Neither of us was ready. And now," James asked. "Now we're ready," Maya said simply. "Now we know our own worth. Now we choose each other from wholeness, not brokenness. So maybe it happened exactly when it was supposed to." James kissed her temple. "I don't deserve you." Maya laughed. "Probably not. But you show up every day trying to earn it anyway, and that's what matters." When they got home, the twins tackled them with stories about all the adventures they'd had with Grandma, and Grace cried until James picked her up, and the house was chaos and noise and absolutely perfect. This was their life, messy and loud and full of love. Maya's firm eventually became one of the top consulting agencies in the country. She hired more black women, more mothers, more people who'd been underestimated and overlooked. She built the kind of company she'd needed when she was 28 and pregnant and terrified. James was her biggest champion, bragging about her success to anyone who'd listen, making sure everyone knew his wife was a powerhouse. They had one more child, a boy they named Alexander, when the twins were 7 and Grace was 3. This pregnancy was different from the twins, planned and wanted and celebrated. James came to every appointment, held Maya's hand through labor, cried when his son was born. He didn't miss a single moment. The twins were obsessed with their baby brother, fighting over who got to hold him, reading him stories he was too young to understand. Emma appointed herself his protector. Ethan declared himself the fun big brother. Grace was slightly jealous at first, but warmed up when she realized she was now a big sister too. Their family was complete. 4 children, 2 parents who'd found each other the hard way, 1 dog that James surprised them with on Christmas morning despite Maya's protests. Their house was never quiet, never clean, never peaceful. It was absolutely everything. On the twins' 8th birthday, Maya and James renewed their vows in the same backyard where they'd gotten married. All 4 kids participated this time. The twins read poems they'd written about family. Grace sang a song she'd learned at school. Alexander gurgled happily in James's arms through the whole ceremony. Maya looked at her husband, at the man who'd broken her heart and then spent years earning it back, who'd become the father their children deserved, who'd proven every single day that he was all in. And she realized that the story of "you were just fun" had become the foundation of something beautiful. because they'd both learned that fun wasn't enough, that love required showing up, fighting through fear, choosing each other even when it was hard. James's vows this time were different from their wedding. "I promise to keep choosing you," he said. "Every morning when I wake up, every night when we fall asleep. I promise to keep showing up for our children, to be present even when work calls, to put family first always. I promise to keep doing the work, the therapy, the hard conversations, the growing. I promise to love you, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. And I promise to never forget how lucky I am that you gave me a second chance." Maya's vows were simpler. "I promise to keep trusting you with my heart, to believe in us even when I'm scared, to build this life with you one day at a time, and to remind you every day that you're worthy of this love, this family, this beautiful, messy life we've created." They kissed while their children cheered, and the dog barked, and neighbors clapped from their yards. It wasn't a perfect moment. Alexander spit up on James's suit. Emma got frosting all over her dress before they even cut the cake. Ethan and a cousin got into a fight over who got the biggest slice. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it was exactly right. That night, after all four kids were finally asleep and the house was quiet for the first time all day, Maya and James sat on their back porch, the same porch where Maya had once sat alone, wondering if James would show up on Saturday, the same porch where he'd asked her to marry him, the same porch where they'd had 1,000 conversations about their dreams and fears and hopes. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't walked into your office that day with the twins?" Maya asked. James was quiet for a moment. "I think about it sometimes, how I might never have known about them, how I might have gone my whole life missing this." He gestured at the house behind them, at the life they'd built. "I would have been successful, probably, made money, run the company well, but I would have been empty. This right here, you and our babies, this is what makes everything else matter." Maya leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, and marveled at how far they'd come. From that girl desperate for his approval to this woman secure in her own worth. From that man running from real emotion to this father and husband who showed up every single day. "I'm glad I walked into your office," Maya said. "Even though I was terrified, even though I thought you might reject us, I'm glad I gave you the chance to step up." "I'm glad you did too," James said. "And I'm glad you kept giving me chances when I didn't deserve them. When I was learning how to be a father, when I messed up, when old fears made me retreat. You could have given up on me so many times, but I didn't," Maya said, "because I saw who you could be, who you were trying to be, and because our children deserve to know their father." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands, watching the stars. Inside, their children slept peacefully, safe and loved and secure, in the knowledge that both their parents would be there in the morning. That was the real happily ever after. Not the proposal, or the wedding, or the romantic gestures, but the everyday showing up, the mundane moments, the choice to keep choosing each other. "You were just fun," James said suddenly, and Maya looked at him surprised. "Remember when I said that? How could I forget?" Maya said. James smiled sadly. "I've thought about those words so many times over the years, how casually I said them, how much damage they did, how they almost cost me everything that matters. Why bring it up now?" Maya asked. "Because I want you to know what I should have said," James answered. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands. "What I should have said was that you were terrifying, that you made me feel things I wasn't ready to feel, that I was falling in love with you and didn't know how to handle it, that you were the most important person in my life and I was too scared to admit it, that you were never just anything, you were everything, and I was too much of a coward to say so." Maya felt tears building, because even after all these years, even after everything they'd built together, hearing him say it still mattered. "I needed to hear that back then." "I know," James said, "and I'm sorry I didn't give it to you. I'm sorry I made you doubt your worth. I'm sorry I let you walk away thinking you meant nothing. But Maya, I want you to know something. You taught me what love really means. Not the easy, comfortable kind, but the kind that challenges you, changes you, makes you become who you're meant to be. You taught me that showing up is more important than being perfect, that our children don't need parents who never mess up. They need parents who try, who admit mistakes, who keep choosing love even when it's hard." "You learned well," Maya said softly, and she kissed him, tasting salt from tears she wasn't sure were his or hers. And as they sat there on their back porch, in the home they'd built together, with their 4 children sleeping safely inside, Maya Chen thought about the journey they'd taken, from that devastating "you were just fun" to this moment of absolute certainty. They'd both been broken, they'd both had to heal, they'd both had to learn how to love from wholeness rather than need. It hadn't been easy, it hadn't been perfect, but it had been real, and in the end, that was all that mattered. They'd built something lasting from the ruins of what they'd been. They'd created a family that was messy and complicated and absolutely beautiful. They'd proven that sometimes the worst moments can become the foundation for the best life. The stars shone above them. Inside, their children dreamed, and Maya and James sat together, holding hands, knowing that tomorrow they'd wake up and do it all over again. The mundane magic of family life, the everyday choice to show up, the constant work of loving each other well, and that was their happily ever after. Not perfect, but real. Not easy, but worth it. Not the end of the story, but the beginning of every beautiful day that followed.